Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping into something really fascinating, sparked by an audio recording one of you sent us.
That's right.
It's called Egyptian Map Has Sunken Land, Where They Came From.
Mm-hmm.
And the core idea that old maps might hold secrets about lost geography, well, it definitely got our attention.
Absolutely. This recording explores the captivating possibility that things we see as mistakes on ancient maps, they might actually be echoes of a world from long ago.
A world maybe even the map makers themselves didn't fully understand.
Exactly. So our plan is to unpack the big questions from this audio, really dig into what these supposed errors could be telling us.
Right. Are they just quirks or something more? The audio points us towards Charles Hapgood.
Famous for his work on maps showing possible Ice Age coastlines.
And also Ptolemy, the ancient map maker whose work, got copied later by Byzantine scholars.
And the audio kicks off with a really intriguing point about Hapgood.
Okay.
It claims that, despite all his research, he apparently wasn't aware of Dogland, or Doggerland as we know it.
The land under the North Sea.
Yeah, that huge area. The recording says the name Doggerland only really became widely known after Hapgood died in 81.
Huh. Which does make you pause, doesn't it?
It does.
The implication being these old maps might have clues that even someone like Hapgood missed. What else could be hiding there?
Well, another thing the audio brings up, which is quite thought-provoking, is about accuracy, or rather, inconsistent accuracy.
How so?
It notes that within the same set of maps, a map of South America is supposedly more accurate than one of Africa.
Okay, wait. South America. More accurate than Africa.
Yeah.
But Africa would have been much closer to, say, the Greeks or Romans or Byzantines copying these things.
Precisely. So the audio asks, how could the map originators, whoever they were, know more about a distant continent than one nearby?
That really challenges your assumptions about how knowledge spread back then.
It certainly does. Then things get even stranger. The audio highlights some really bizarre depictions on these maps. Well, what looks like an ice-free Antarctica. And maybe an ice-free North Pole, too.
Okay, Antarctica. The audio speaker does mention thinking maybe it was just Australia, misidentified.
Right, that's a reasonable first thought. You see something weird, you try to fit it.
But an ice-free North Pole.
That one's harder to brush off, as the speaker points out. What could explain that on an ancient map?
So this leads to something the audio calls a beautiful tool map.
Yes, the speaker seemed quite impressed by it. And from there, the recording dives into this potential link to ancient mathematics.
Okay.
Specifically, the idea that Ptolemy dividing the world into 360 degrees might connect back to Sumerian base 60 math.
So not necessarily Ptolemy's invention.
That's the speculation.
Yeah.
Could this fundamental part of map making actually come from much older sources, maybe Sumerians, or even, as the audio hints, these sort of mythical ancient giants?
Wow, so this core geographical understanding might be way older than we think.
And the audio throws in another really tantalizing idea.
Yeah.
That Ptolemy might have found this incredibly detailed source map in the Library of Alexandria.
The Library of Alexandria, of course.
And just as an aside, the audio mentions a theory about part of this map being stolen.
Stolen?
Yeah, and somehow connected to Tiwanaku in South America, though they say that's for another time. Still, it adds to the mystery, doesn't it?
It really does. The potential scale of this knowledge. Okay, so shifting back slightly to Hapgood, the audio mentions his observations about India on these maps.
Right. Hapgood noticed that where we see the landmass of India today, some ancient maps show what looks more like an archipelago, a chain of islands.
An archipelago instead of India.
Yeah. And the audio's interpretation, maybe this represents India during a time of much, much higher sea levels.
So not an error, but a snapshot of a different geological time.
Potentially. The audio asks quite pointedly, why would ancient map makers draw India so small and these islands so large, unless it reflected some past reality they were copying?
It's a fair question. It pushes back against just dismissing it as bad drawing.
And this really sets the stage for the audio's main event, the core argument.
Which is?
The speaker believes they've found Doggerland on Roman-era maps.
Doggerland, the sunken land in the North Sea. On Roman maps.
But Doggerland sank thousands of years before Rome, didn't it?
Exactly. That's the puzzle. Specifically, Byzantine copies of Roman maps. The speaker claims to see it.
Okay, how? What are they seeing?
Well, first, they describe this odd, straight line on the edge of the map area, almost like a tear-off mark.
Suggesting it was copied from something else.
That's the implication. Like maybe the copyist didn't have the full picture. Then they focus on Britain, called Albon for England and Scotland,
Uh-huh.
and Denmark. They look distorted, apparently. Scotland's at a right angle. Denmark is misshapen.
Okay, distortions aren't uncommon in old maps.
True, but the hypothesis here is bold. These aren't just mistakes.
They're what?
They are Doggerland, or at least a representation of it, copied imperfectly perhaps, from a source map dating back to when Doggerland existed, before it sank around 6000 BC. Wow, okay, that's a huge claim, a memory of a lost land embedded in later maps.
It is. And the audio connects this straight to Atlantis.
Of course, Atlantis.
Doggerland was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, relatively speaking, from Greece. The audio suggests it could fit the description rich, maybe warm, especially during the Holocene maximum period.
A warmer climate back then.
Yeah, and the audio even links that time frame loosely to when the Sphinx might have been built or restored. It's weaving together a lot of threads.
It sounds like it. So, do they offer any proof beyond the interpretation of the shapes?
Well, the audio asserts proof by referencing maps from the time of Herodotus, Plato, Solon.
Figures linked to the Atlantis story itself.
Right. The interpretation offered is that maybe Britain was sometimes left off maps or drawn strangely because it represented a sunken land.
But the audio refines that a bit.
Yes, it clarifies the idea isn't that all of Britain sank, but primarily Doggerland, which was connected to it. Only parts of the UK coastline would have changed dramatically. The speaker even throws in a personal thought about Scarborough in Scotland.
The Neolithic site.
Yeah, suggesting maybe it was further inland originally, before coasts eroded or land subsided. It's anecdotal, but adds flavor.
And the smoking gun, as the audio calls it.
It comes back to those unusual shapes. The claim is the way Britain and Denmark are depicted, their relative positions, lines up too well with Doggerland's probable layout to be just coincidence.
So it all hinges on whether you accept that interpretation of the map's errors.
Pretty much. And it leads to that staggering question the audio raises.
Could Ptolemy have used a map from 6000 BC?
Or at least a map derived from one that old? It seems almost unbelievable.
But the audio proposes a mechanism, right? How that knowledge could have survived.
Yes, it weaves it into Egyptian history. The theory goes, refugees from Doggerland, fleeing the final cataclysm.
What cataclysm?
The audio mentions a stronger eruption, but clarifies it was probably a massive landslide off Norway, the Storegga slide causing a huge tsunami. Around 6200 BC, actually.
Ah, the Storegga slide? Okay.
So these refugees supposedly flee to places like Egypt, bringing their maps and their story. The story of their lost homeland.
Which then becomes the Atlantis legend preserved in Egyptian records, later told to Solon.
That's the proposed lineage. The map and the legend travel together.
So the core argument is, don't dismiss the weird shapes on Ptolemy's maps of Britain and Denmark as errors.
Exactly. See them instead as corrupted, maybe, but ultimately real geographical data from a much, much older source map depicting Doggerland.
Well, wrapping up this deep dive, it's certainly a mind-bending idea we've explored, prompted by that audio clip.
It really is. Could these maps we often look at as, primitive or inaccurate, could they actually hold fragments of genuine information about landscapes lost to time?
Information that even the people copying the maps centuries later didn't realize they had.
It presents that classic aha moment, doesn't it? The thought that maybe a mistake isn't a mistake.
Right. Maybe it's a clue, a historical echo.
And it definitely makes you wonder, what other odd details, other inaccuracies in old texts or records might deserve a second look with this kind of perspective?
Could other myths, other legends we think of as pure fantasy, have a similar origin in some forgotten reality, some lost land or catastrophic event?
It's fascinating to consider. And that brings us to a final thought, building on the audio speculation about knowledge traveling.
If people from Doggerland did bring maps and stories to Egypt,
what else might they have brought? What other skill, technologies, cultural ideas might have spread across the ancient world in ways we haven't even imagined yet, leaving just subtle traces for us to find? Makes you think, doesn't it?